I discovered or learned that I was HIV positive. It was October 1982. I couldn't believe it. I was 33, you know. My life was only just beginning, and here I was being given a death sentence.
Now, this story is based on not just your story, but the group of you, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. No. The film is based in fact, but Stephen has woven this amazing tale, and it is incredible.
The minute I met Jonathan, I thought this guy has got to be a character. He was so charismatic and flamboyant.
He really played a key role in winning the hearts and minds, not through political dialogue, but through personally being who he was.
When he told me that one of the things about him that became famous in the Valley was that he loved to dance, I knew that there was the potential for an amazing filmic moment.
There we are, all dancing, and this is me. Stephen has created this dance for Dominic West, who plays my character.
It could very easily not fit into the film, but it does, because it moves things along and it advances the themes.
I love Dominic's performance in the film, and he really captures that sense of what Jonathan was all about.
If I had ever been able to dance like he dances, I would have been a very happy lad.
God, I miss disco.
So Mr. Jonathan Blake.
Yeah.
Legend, the man, the legend.
Oh, no. Yeah.
The poster boy.
Poster boy, yeah, I'll go with the poster boy. The legend I find kind of sort of, you know, I'm not dead.
Well, no, that is why you're a legend. You defied.
Yeah, that I defied them.
The Grim Reaper.
Yeah, no. I mean, sort of, that is, you know,
remarkable.
I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
You know, I can only think that my parents must have blessed me with particularly good genes, because, you know, there's no explanation to it.
But then you're not the only one, are you?
No, I'm not.
You've got a friend George,
I have my friend George.
And he was L5.
He was L5. But actually, I mean, what was interesting was that when they looked back, because for some reason they had taken a whole lot of blood from him and stored it, and that was taken in 1979, and when they went back and looked at it, he already had HIV in 1979.
Wow.
So, you know, in terms of longest surviving, sort of, I may have the number, but
yes, he's got 40 years now.
Yeah.
So just to put it into context, so I was born in April 1982.
Oh wow!
And you were diagnosed in October.
1982.
So effectively, you've been living
with the virus
for as long as I've been alive.
Yes, I mean, sort of, you know, a few months short.
Yeah. Well, depending when you contracted it.
Well, yeah, I mean, sort of, it's interesting. I think I know when I contracted it. So yes, I've been living with it longer, because I contracted it in around about February 1981, because I went to San Francisco for a very dear friend's wedding, and I actually stayed with George there, because he was a copywriter, and so he'd been headhunted and was living there. So it was great. So I got to stay with him. And I love bathhouses. I've always loved bathhouses. And so I went to the bathhouses in San Francisco. And at that point, you know, there was something in the air, but there was nothing definite. The bathhouses hadn't been closed, what have you. And yeah, so sort of that's where I met my virus.
I was going to ask if you ever get tired of talking about it, but then I kind of realised as well, I was like, the landscape and the conversation constantly changes. Like this year alone, with Gav Thomas coming out, and that's a whole new discussion.
Yes.
So I think, am I right to think that you'll never get tired, because every year there's something different to talk about?
There's always something different to talk about. I mean, you know, that's true. I mean, yeah, from time to time one sort of one does get tired, but what is amazing, and I think that it's in recent years. So once they had kind of found the fact that if you're on effective medication and your viral load is undetectable, you cannot pass the virus. And when I heard that,
It's a game changer,
that
isn't it?
was totally a game changer. But not only a game changer in terms of, the game changer was in one's head.
Yeah.
That I had living with this virus, concerned that I wasn't going to pass it on, which of course has a huge effect on one's libido and on sexual energy and what have you. And I've never been good at dealing with condoms. So suddenly to actually be told that I cannot pass the virus, you know, even unprotected sex, I cannot pass the virus, is just so liberating. It's almost like going back to
When you were
back to the
33
60s,
again.
yes.
So going back to that, though, I wanted to ask. So you met your partner when you were, was it 36? I guess you were.
We met on the 1st of April 1983.
Yeah.
So I would have been 34 and he would have been 37. So he's 3 years older than me.
And is he negative, or was he?
No, I mean sort of.
So did that draw you together, do you think?
No, I mean sort of. Basically, I had gone to I had. Oh, gosh, I was very isolated.
Yeah.
And after my diagnosis, I had attempted suicide in the December of 1982. Couldn't do it. I heard the voice of my mother in my head saying, you know, you clear up your own mess, Jonathan. You can leave it for others to clear up. And I just thought, committing suicide is going to leave the most unbelievable mess. And so I couldn't do it. So then it's a question of what you do. Well, you've got to get on and live. And how am I going to do that? You know, I got this killer virus coursing through my veins. My sort of self-confidence is on the floor. Sort of, it's just terrible. And I would go off to bars and I would want to meet people, but I didn't want to meet people because I didn't want to have to explain.
Right.
You know? And I picked up this copy of Capital Gay, and there was this tiny advertisement: Gays for a Nuclear-Free Future are running a coach from Gays the Word on the 1st of April 1983 at 11 o'clock. And I thought, all right, that's going to be my entry back into society. I'm going to go to that. And I remember sort of, you know, waking up in the morning sort of feeling sick to my stomach, but I was going to do it. I sort of, you know, girded my loins, I got myself dressed, I sort of got the tube. I was living in Shadwell in the East End. I got over to Russell Square tube station. I was walking out of the tube station. I had just got out. I could see the coach sort of up by Gaze the Word, and I thought, what the fuck am I doing here? And I was literally about to turn on my heels and flee, and this person said, hello, my name's Nigel, what's yours? And I was absolutely stopped in my track and turned round, and there was this man who was wearing these ochre and crimson pantaloons, green Wellington boots, fair owl sweater, this mop of black curly hair, and then this most amazing smile. And I said, oh, I'm Jonathan. And that was it. And we just started talking and walked up and spent the whole day on the coach. He introduced me to all his friends. I didn't think I would know anybody there, but actually sort of I did, because Noel Gregg from Gay Sweatshop was there, and I knew Noel. Sort of, I auditioned for him. I'd never sort of worked with him, but and it was just the most amazing. And we just talked and we talked and we talked and we talked and we talked, and did this incredible stand together. And there must have been, I don't know, 100,000 people. Yeah. So we basically, it was a human train around Greenham Common, Burfield and Aldermaston, which are the two British nuclear establishments. And it was fabulous. And then at the end of the day, got back on the coach, and Noel said, right, everybody back to his squat in West Hampstead for a party. So we went back there and we're still chatting. And then the next day, I invited Nigel to come over to my place in the East End. I had this lovely little flat. It was North Block 11, Elf Row, Shadwell. That was my Peabody estate. Fab. So he arrived with a bunch of anemones and donuts. And he said, you know, you're living over here isolated. I'm living in North London, but I know of a squat in Brixton. Why don't we move in together? And I thought, I'm going to be dead tomorrow or next week or, you know, in 2 weeks' time. Why not? And that was my attitude, that since I'm going to be dead, you might as well just do it. Either don't do it or do it.
Yeah.
And that was that. And so sort of he knew someone who wanted to sublet my flat, and we moved in. And then we had to move out from that place for various reasons. I won't go into those. But after 3 months, but he also, because he had lived in Brixton during the riots, and in point of fact, he and a friend of his, he had got tickets to hear Janet Baker and Julius Caesar at the Colosseum. So it was a question of, did they riot or did they go and see Janet Baker? And they decided to go and see Janet Baker, which actually saved them from prison.
Oh.
So they left, went, came back, and of course the riots had erupted. There was sort of, you know, smouldering stuff everywhere, and there were policemen not allowing them through. And I just said, but I live up the road there. And they eventually let them back. They lived at 159 Railton Road, so across the garden. So, you know, so he knew of this housing co-op, and had heard that there were 2 rooms going in 146, so 2 doors down. So we came up there and met with the people and asked if the rooms were still available, and they were, and could we come and live there? And they said yeah. And we joined the housing co-op, and the rest is history.
Oh, yeah.
And here 36 years later, or 34 years later actually, here, still here. And I'll go out in a cardboard box. You know.
A wooden one.
No. Not cardboard.
So going back to your life before that, so you were an actor.
I was.
Well, you still are.
Yeah, no, but I mean, what's interesting is that in 1981, kind of basically the business seemed to give me up.
Right. Okay.
So sort of, I mean,
What had you done
I was
until that?
I was a jobbing actor.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of I started off. I was really fortunate. I went to Rose Bruford in 1967 to 1970. So really sort of interesting times, because, like, you know, the law, we had just been partially decriminalised.
Yeah.
Not that it made any difference to me, because of course sort of I was under 21. You know, I was 18, and so sort of went there. But of course there was this whole sort of burgeoning sort of gay scene. And what was interesting was that there was still the hangover, because whereas before, you know, there were bars, but I mean, it was very kind of low key, the bars. People used to, hi Martin, people used to have,
Is Michael coming over?
I'm in an interview.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, but he is later on. That was a friend who exercises, my partner Nigel.
Okay. Yes.
And there is another friend of ours who is going to come over this afternoon to see Nigel, just for the folks to
Context.
It's not, yes, context. Context is all. So sort of So what was really interesting was that sort of there is this burgeoning sort of gay scene, but there are still people throwing house parties.
Right.
And so it was amazing, because you actually got to meet people in their homes, and then you would meet other people there, and so there was this kind of sort of you got to meet people, you know, in their own environment, as opposed to just in bars and in clubs where there's kind of no context. So that was really interesting, and I had some really extraordinary experiences sort of, you know, from that. But sort of, you know, it was fabulous. I would come up to London, because I was, you know, Rose Bruford is in Sidcup.
Yeah.
I had never heard of, well, I'd heard of Sidcup, but only in the context of The Caretaker.
Right, yes.
But sort of, you know, he lives in Sidcup. That's the only time I'd ever heard of it. So sort of, you know, we were known as the Virgins by the Lake by sort of Lambda and Rada, because we were out of London, and there was this lake in Lammerby Park where Rose Bruford's college is. Anyway, I mean, it was extraordinary. So I would come up to London at weekends, and I would sort of, you know, go to the King's Road, and there were 3 bars on the King's Road. So there was the Colville, there was the Markham Arms, and there was Queen's Head. And so one would kind of parade from one to the other, and I was, you know, it was the Flower Power, wasn't it? And I'd got sort of, you know, flowing scarves and ratty old sort of rabbit fur coats and things, and I would wear tights rather than trousers. I mean, it's just, you know, but it was amazing. I mean, it was extraordinary, just extraordinary. And I remember sort of, you know, going cruising in Hyde Park, and there was this gig going on, and it was the Rolling Stones, and I just came across it, you know, by happenstance, because of course, you know, they're not fenced off in those days. It was just open. It was open to anyone.
Wow.
I mean, that was just, you know, so there were all these just extraordinary, they were really amazing sort of days. And then sort of I finished at Rose Bruford, and I sort of got a job, as my first job was as an acting ASM at Derby Playhouse, and I was there for a year. And then, you know, one would sort of finish one job, and I would have periods of being out of work, but it was fairly easy because you could get jobs in restaurants, so I would sort of do that and then get another job. And so, yeah, I was basically a jobbing actor. And then I got a job for the BBC. It was a television called The Regiment, and we had done all the studio filming or recording, and they were going to film the outside scenes because it's set in the Boer War in South Africa, and they were going to do the external shots later in the year of basically the first concentration camps, because concentration camps come from the Boer War. And so I was put on a retainer.
Nice.
Which was amazing. Now, in the sort of interim period, I had been to one of these parties, met a mad fabric designer called Joel Levitt, nice Jewish boy, and he said, I have this friend who would just really love you. He comes to London twice a year because he's a buyer for Bloomingdale's, and they basically would come to this country and go to all the various sort of fashion shows and in Paris and things, see what sort of, you know, the best designs were, and buy a sample and then have them knocked off in Japan.
Nice.
To sell in Bloomingdale's. Anyway, so he said, "Is it all right if I give you, or give him your phone number? And I said, of course. Now you have to remember that this is before mobile phones,
You got
things,
landlines.
so it is landlines. And I was lucky because I always, wherever, you know, whatever bedsit I was living in, there had to be a telephone
Yeah.
in the hallway. So I gave the number, and that was that. And as luck would have it, I get this phone call from Bernie Ozer. Would I come and like to meet him for lunch at the Connaught? So I said, oh yes. So I kind of smartened myself up and arrived there, but I didn't have a jacket and I didn't have a tie. And when I arrived at the restaurant, the maitre d' wouldn't let me in. I said, but I'm coming to meet Bernard Ozer. So he said, I will go and fetch Mr. Ozer. So he brought Mr. Ozer over, and Bernie said, I'm sure you can find a jacket for my guest, and then took me off to buy me a tie. So I got a kipper tie because they were all the rage, and we ate. We had a fabulous time chatting away, and he said, you know, if you're ever fancy coming to New York, you know, just come. You can come and stay. And I thought, oh yeah, Charles will be a fine thing, and that was that. Suddenly, I have this retainer from the BBC. I've got money. And I thought, all right. So I went to phone him, lots of coins to put in, but basically said, you know, did you really mean that you know, if I could get my airfare, I could come and stay? And he said, yeah. So I did. So I bought the ticket, £80 return, and went. This was 1 September, and had the most amazing time.
Wow.
I mean, I arrived. There was a car at JFK Airport to greet me. Driven in, we came over the 59th Street Bridge. You're seeing all the sort of, you know, these skyscrapers that I've only seen in films. You know, all these black and white films. You know, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Pan Am Building. I mean, just extraordinary. So we go over the sort of 59th Street Bridge, and arrive at a place called Serendipitous. So we meet, that's fine. And just, my head was totally turned. I mean, I went to see the first night of Grease on Broadway.
Wow.
I saw Bette Midler in her first concert at Carnegie Hall after leaving the Continental Bars. I went to Bernstein's Mass at the Met. I saw Follies. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And they said, you know, if you want to come here and work, we have friends in Washington, they can get you your green card. And I thought, oh yeah, that's nice. Anyway, went back, and I was doing pantomime in Swansea, which is kind of important because, like, sort of, my mother was born in Swansea in 1914, January 1914. Her father was a rabbi. But in the March, they emigrated to Canada.
Okay.
So she left. And that was that. So Swansea was kind of, it was already in my consciousness. So here I am playing sort of pantomime. I'm the slave of the lamp in Aladdin, and it was fabulous. There was sort of Reg Confidentially Dixon, because he had his patter song. He was the dame. There were this wonderful couple, Anna Lou and Maria, who had this bird and dog act. You know, the speciality act. But it was also, it was the first miners' strike. So there was the 3-day week.
Okay.
So you would get electricity for 3 weeks and not for 4. So the company bought an old ship's fog light, which just gave this blinding white light, and had a generator. And so on the days that there was no electricity, the generator would go on and the show would go on.
Amazing.
So it was extraordinary. So sort of so we did that, and at the same time they are filming the exterior scenes of the concentration camp in Neath, up on the sort of the heaths above Neath. So I had this sort of crazy idea crazy situation where sort of a car would come and meet me from my digs, take me to shoot, you know, the few scenes that I had, and then drive me back to the theatre. So I would arrive theatre limousine.
Wow.
Yeah. So sort of. So that was that. And then I had this period when sort of I didn't seem to be getting a great deal. I mean, a few jobs, but not a lot. And sort of ringing in my head was this idea that sort of I could get the green card and all be fine. So I thought I'm going to go and find fame and fortune in New York, because I'd had such an amazing time. I thought, yeah, let's go back there. So I did. But what had happened in 1973?
Oh, you're asking me? I wasn't
Yeah.
even born.
Oh, you weren't born, of course.
82 I was.
Yeah. Well, Watergate.
Right, yes.
So nobody in Washington was doing anything, and their friend was Kissinger's sister, but nothing. So I'm arrived there and no green card. And so my friend Bernie says, well, we'll get you a lawyer. Well, you know, I'm sure they'll sort you out. Oh yeah. Anyway, so I go to meet with this lawyer, and this lawyer looks at me and says, but who are you? He said, I can't even get Peter Firth, who'd just been playing sort of, you know, in Equus on Broadway. I can't even get Peter Firth's green card. You? So that was that. So I sort of, you know, worked in restaurants, had an amazing time, an amazing summer. I mean, you know, did the steam bars. I mean, just it was extraordinary. Went to Fire Island, the works, and then sort of I was working in a restaurant on the Upper East Side, and there was a guy there called John, who I sort of was working with, and he was an actor, and he was going out on tour, and he said sort of, would you like to rent my apartment? I've got a studio apartment. It's in the Ansonia building, which is where the Continental Bars were. And I thought, yeah. And I then got a job on the West Side in a restaurant that was right opposite Lincoln Center. So one was making stacks of money. It was just ridiculous, you know, the way they tip this fish restaurant. So I worked there, and I lived in the Ansonia building, and that was amazing. And then it reached kind of October, and I thought, you know, I am not going to get to work as an actor, and I really do want to. So I came back to this country, and you know, again started sort of working as a jobbing actor, and I had some good jobs and some fun times, and it was great, you know, that was fine. And then I got a film in like 1980, and I thought, this is it, this is a big feature, and everything's going to change. And it was called From a Far Country, and it was the life of Karol Wojtyła, the Polish Pope, John Paul II. And I'd been booked for 2 weeks, and I arrived there, and this character called Joseph, and he's a Jew living in the ghetto, and is rescued from the ghetto. And they kept writing up the part. So although I'd been booked to be there for 2 months, I was eventually there for 3 months. So 2 weeks, 3 months I was there. And this character sort of, basically he joined the Communist Party, and was with the partisans, and he then sort of rises sort of up, so that he sort of almost gets to being like sort of, you know, the top guy in the Communist Party in Krakow. and he's a teacher at the university. And then in 1969, they threw all the Jews out of their jobs. I mean, it was almost as though World War II never happened. I mean, it was extraordinary. I didn't even know about this.
Wow.
And so he's kind of thrown out and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so I just thought, this is great, you know, going to sort of find fame and fortune, become a household name. Nothing. Nada. And sort of then I was back working at Joe Allen's, and that was amazing. That I was always really lucky that in 1978 Joe Allen's opened. Well, 1977 Joe Allen's opened. Joe Allen's is this.
Yeah, it's still going.
Yeah, but it you know, in New York, the original Joe Allen's prides itself on all the waiters are out of work actors.
Yeah.
So the same was going to be in London, and so I went and applied for a job and got a job, and it was great because it meant that whenever I got a job I could leave there and there would always be a job for me. So I went back to work at Joe Allen's, and I worked there and there was nothing was coming in terms of theatre. But what was great was that mates who were in the West End would come in and eat, so you know, one was seeing sort of friends and things. And it was lovely, and you know, so that was good. And then kind of round about sort of, I suppose, July of that year, I began to sort of feel unwell, and like sort of my lymph nodes were getting painful, and I didn't know sort of, you know, what this was. And eventually I could no longer work there, and so I sort of, you know, had to stop. But because I had been working there for over 12 months, I'd actually been working there 15 months by the time I finished, I got sick pay and I got holiday pay, which if I'd been an actor I'd have got nothing, which kind of tided me over. And I eventually sort of, you know, things were so bad I was walking like a gorilla. I mean, every lymph node sort of under my armpits, in my groin, so I was just really and in a lot of pain. And so I went to my GP, made an appointment, went to see her, and arrived, and as I walked in the door she got up and she said, "Shake my hand." And as I'm shaking my hand, she feels in this lymph node there, which was really painful. I went, "Ow, what'd you do that for?" She said, "That's the sailor's handshake. Whenever the sailors used to go into port, they would shake the women or the men's hand. And if that was node was up, it was a sign of syphilis, and they wouldn't go with them."
Right.
So she said, "You know, have you had a test for syphilis recently?" So I said, "Well, I've had syphilis, but no." So she said, "I suggest you go to the special clinic." So I took myself down to James Pringle House, which is where I went, which is part of the Middlesex Hospital. That was the Clap clinic I went to. And I arrived there and they were all over me. And they saw them and they was huge, and they said they wanted to do a biopsy. So they put me onto a side ward. Gay boys were always put on side wards in those days. I don't know why, but you know, not to infect our homosexuality on the rest of the public. I don't know. Anyway, I'm in there and there is one other person who is in there, and he is on death's doorstep.
Really?
I mean, it was just like, and I suddenly realised that I knew him, and that I'd been out on tour in 1976 with Love's Labour's Lost, which we'd done in Regent's Park. And I'd met him in Norwich, and we'd had this fling for a week in Norwich, and he's lying in this bed. I mean, he's out of it, so I'm not going to sort of go, "Oh, I know you." And that was that. Anyway, they did the biopsy, and I'm then have to wait for 2 or 3 days for the results to come back, and they come back and they say, this isn't good news. You've got a virus which is called HTLV3. It's a terminal diagnosis. We have nothing that we can offer you. There is no medication. And that is that. And I'm 33 years old.
Yeah.
And my life is over. And then they say you can go home. I mean, and at this point one is beginning to hear kind of sort of rumblings that all is not well.
And you saw the guy in the room.
And I'd seen the guy in the room, and that sort of, it had never even dawned on me.
Right.
Anyway, so that was that. Yeah. I mean, they did say there is palliative care. I mean, we are blessed that we have a national health service, because, like, sort of, if it had been America or France or anywhere else, I mean, there was nothing, you know. And so, yeah.
So I suppose on reflection, it must have changed so many times over the years. Because I was talking to someone recently about if you were to get diagnosed today, how that would impact you. And it's no longer carries that death sentence, but it's still...
It's so shocking.
Yeah, it still has that kind of resonance.
Yes.
And it interests...
And there's still a huge amount of stigma around it. So that you know, you get this diagnosis and you're having to deal with all of that. So sort of, you know, for
But then at your stage of it, was there a stigma beginning to...
Oh, there was already...
Did that develop?
Yes. I mean, the stigma developed because, you know, the right-wing press, just, they talked about it.
But that came later, didn't it?
Well, you know, they started talking about sort of, you know, that there is this gay plague, that sort of, that we've, you know, our behaviour, you know, we've brought it on ourselves. I mean, so they just, you know, they were after us. I mean, sort of, you know, they've never been sort of fond of homosexuals and queers and what have you. And this was just, they had, you know, it was like they had carte blanche to just go after us. So sort of, you know, there was all that sort of build up, and the fact that, you know, you have got a disease for which there is no cure, and the fact that it's a killer virus. Yeah. So, you know, suddenly, you know, you're a modern day leper. Because, like, sort of, you know, who's going to want to sort of have anything to do with you or in one's head? So there's a lot of self-stigma. But sort of, so it was difficult. It was really, 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 really sort of really bleak.
And you speak about that a couple of months after your diagnosis, where you considered suicide.
Yeah.
Do you now, 36 years later, look back on reflection and think,
I'm so pleased I never went through it. Yeah. No.
That must resonate every day.
I mean, yeah. I mean, in a way, I think that. I mean, it's interesting. Sort of, it used to. It's kind of disappeared. I've got a bit more kind of, I don't know what the word is. Kind of, sort of, just blasé about it. Maybe. There is still, you know, this notion of survivor guilt.
Oh, really?
That's something. You know, because one lost a lot of friends. Yeah. And sort of, there is that sense, why them, why not me? You know, and it's kind of, you know, it's not like sort of, oh, I'm beating myself up about it. But there was a period when I found it really, really sort of difficult. But that was sort of, you know, at the time that there really sort of, you know, that there was still nothing. And then you had the whole debacle with AZT. Because I remember sort of.
So for those who don't realise, this was a pill that was.
It was a failed chemotherapy drug, and you know the company GlaxoSmithKline, blah.
Trialing it
basically, as far as I was concerned, they decided that, you know, it had failed as a chemotherapy drug, let's use it on them because we might be able to make some money back off it.
Wow.
You know, that's my
That's how you
attitude.
think,
And,
yeah.
you know, and
So you refused to take it, didn't you?
Yeah, basically what happened was that I was asked if I would join the Concord cohort. And so what they were doing was that they explained that you have a cohort and you split it down the middle, and one half gets the pill and the other half gets the placebo. So I just asked, because I thought it made sense, I said, well, if you're going to, do you pair us off? So someone who's got like a similar build to me or metabolism is going to sort of get the pill, or, you know, one of us will get the pill and the other will get the placebo, and then you see which one
Direct
does
comparison.
best. And they went, oh, no, that's far too complicated. And I just saw red.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if you could put a line down the middle of me, and this is just being ridiculous, you know, but if you put a line down the middle of me and you give one half of me the pill and the other half the placebo, and we see which side does best, that I think is a trial. But if you can't be bothered to do that, I can't be bothered to do your trial.
Wow.
And that basically saved me, because everybody who I know, well, bar one or two.
So these pills effectively had the counter effect. They were killing people.
Yeah. What they did was, they did what all old chemotherapy drugs was. They completely wiped out the immune system. So it left you open to any opportunistic infection that's around. And so PCP, CMV retinitis came in, and that's what killed them. So it wasn't the medication didn't kill them. The medication allowed for their immune systems to be
vulnerable.
Totally.
Wow.
So that was, yeah. And there were a lot of people, you know, I suppose that I'm slightly weird in that I didn't care if I died.
Yeah.
Which is weird, because life is precious.
Yeah.
And I do think life is precious and what's the name. But I just I was in this sort of headspace, and for quite some time, that I really didn't care. You know, if I died, I died. That was it. So to me, it's always been, you know, it's quality of life, not quantity of life. As long as I had a good quality of life, I was happy. But, you know, I didn't need to live. I don't need to live to 100. You know, that's not important. What is important is that I have a quality of life around. So, yeah.
And then during that, after you were first diagnosed, those interim years, did you still have a desire to act? Was it, or did that kind of change your agenda?
No, basically, you know, the business had given me up, and that was that. And so what was amazing, you know, Ken Livingstone was the leader of the GLC, and, you know, he has a bad press, and, you know, which is difficult, but he had this amazing policy, because when he was leader of the GLC, he also was in charge of the Inner London Education Authority, and he brought in this policy that if you were out of work and unemployed, you could pay £1 and you could do any number of courses at City Lit, Morley College, any other education thing for a year.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. So Nigel and I met Nigel by this time, Nigel and I would go off and do all kinds of things. And one day he was going off with a friend of his, Barry Prothero, to do a trouser making class. And I said, oh, that sounds fun. Can I come along? Yeah, the more the merrier. So we go along, and there's another education place called The Strand, which is on Tulse Hill, so it's not far from here. And we arrive there, and we're on the 5th floor. It's in this sort of what had been an old school. And we were up on the 5th floor, and it was the the what had been the old science buildings. So there are these tall tables where the Bunsen burners would have been. And the first thing that Harry says is, right, I want you to sit up on the table cross-legged. My father used to sell furniture. If you ever sat on a table, you were screamed at, get off the table, chairs for sitting on, not table. So Harry, with one phrase, had given me permission.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, sort of, tatting. So originally, tailors used to sit on the table with a board across their legs, and that is what they use to make the garments. So I'm sitting there tatting, thinking, how many pairs of trousers do I need? Really what I need to learn is how to make a pattern. And somebody pipes up, oh, they do that at the London College of Fashion. Well, I've paid my pound. So I go down to the London College of Fashion in Shoreditch and enrol for a pattern making class. And I'm loving it. I've really kind of taken to it. It's a nice challenge. And one of the tutors says, oh, by the way, I don't know if you might be interested, but we do this 3-year City and Guilds tailoring course. I thought, I'm going to be dead before I finish that, so there's no way. But yeah, why not? The miners' strike is over. And it'll keep me occupied, keep me busy, because in my head, as long as I could keep myself busy and occupied, I could outrun the virus.
Yeah.
This was my head. So sort of I enrolled, and I got a sort of basically I got a job. I mean, I got a place, and I applied to Lambeth for a grant, saying, if you can't see your way to give me a grant, you are condemning me to a life on the dole. Anyway, they gave me a grant, so that was great. And then suddenly, 3 years is up.
Wow.
And I finished, and what am I going to do? Because I can't go and work down Savile Row, so that's out of the question. And another tutor says, look, I can't get you a job, but I could get you an introduction to the wardrobe at English National Opera. And I thought, I love opera, it's so overblown. Theatre holds no mystique for me. So yeah, so I get the interview. I go to the workroom. I've been told to go and sit in the workroom to wait for my interview, and everybody's busy sort of on the machines, and I'm feeling very nervous, and I really don't want to engage in conversation. So I'm looking at the sort of the posters on the wall and whatever on their notice boards, and suddenly my eye hits on this letter from St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, thanking everybody in the workroom for all the support that they'd given this guy called Peter, who had been the head cutter in the men's end, who had just died from HIV/AIDS.
Really?
And I thought, I want to work here, because when I get ill, they'll understand. I'm not going to tell them. It'll be all by osmosis, but they'll at least understand.
Right.
And I did my interview, and basically the manager said, look, I can't offer you a full-time job because we're still in negotiations with the union, with Bectu, but I could offer you full-time freelance. And I thought, all right, I'll take that. And it was the most amazing apprenticeship. It was just...
And did you not tell anybody then about...
No. I mean, all my friends,
knew.
Knew. But sort of... I never told my parents, but my younger brother, who, having been through Oxford, come out of Oxford, working in the Home Office, thought, I never wanted to do this. I always wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So he went and retrained at Birmingham Medical School, came out, sort of was a junior doctor, came up to London, worked at the Westminster Hospital, when the Westminster Hospital, before it, was closed down, and became the Chelsea in Westminster. But he worked in the Cobler. You know, they have to go and do different, you know, they go around different
continents.
Yeah, and so he'd worked at the Cobler. So I was able to tell him, because when I got ill, he would be able to explain to my parents, because there's so much misinformation going on. So I've been incredibly fortunate in that way. So yeah.
And then when did you become an activist? How did that come about?
Well, basically, when I sort of met Nigel had always been really politically active.
Yeah.
He was a member of the Gay Left Collective back in the 70s. He with Emmanuel Cooper and Philip Derbyshire and Simon Watney. I mean, amazing. Jeffrey Weeks. I mean, sort of just extraordinary people. So he'd always been sort of active. And when he heard that LGSM, Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, was starting up, it was obvious we'd go and join them. And so that was kind of what, you know, brought me into it. I'd always been, you know, as an actor, one had to, you know, be a member of Equity, but I always thought trade unions were really, really important. So, and I suppose that even my mother was by nature a socialist, though she always voted Tory, because her basically, when they moved to Canada, they went to Winnipeg. They lived in a house on stilts. They had chickens sort of running around underneath them, and I thought, why on stilts? And of course they have winters, don't they? So snow is
of course.
So you have to be above the snow line. So anyway, so then sort of, and I don't know the reasons. So he was Orthodox, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, but for some reason in 1924 he turned Reform, and there's no one I can ask why did that happen. I wish I could, but anyway, and they moved from Winnipeg to Montreal, and I remember my mother always talking about skiing down Mont Royal, but you know, as a like 12-year-old. Anyway, they got there in 1924. In 1926, at the age of 44, he died of a heart attack, and they were left penniless. They had to sell everything that they had, and he had this amazing library apparently, and there are one or two books that have survived. But her aunt, my mother's aunt, so my grandmother's sister, had married a man called Louis Silkin. Louis Silkin was a solicitor. He had a mistress, and his mistress said to him, you know, if you want to get on, you need to join a political party. Well, he couldn't join the Tories because in those days the Tories wouldn't take Jews. I mean, you know, we're talking about sort of the 20s. So he joined the Labour Party. And, you know, I don't know exactly what his job was, but whatever it was, he was given a hereditary peerage by the Labour Party eventually. So they essentially sold up, and they came and they moved back to this country, and they actually lived in Dulwich, because that's where Louis Silkin and Rosa lived. So my mother basically, although they had got maidservants, manservants, everything, that the three Silkin boys, so there was Arthur was the eldest, and there was John and Sam, who were the three boys, never had to lift a finger. My mother's elder sister was Anne was a journalist. She was older than my mother, so she was a working journalist. So it was only my mother that was there as this child, and she was made to skivvy. And my mother vowed that she was going to have 3 boys and they would all be house trained. And we were. But what was amazing was that she used to walk down Relton Road every day to get a bus from Morley's down to Elephant and Castle. And I remember when I'd moved in here thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to tell my parents that I live in just off Relton Road, and all they'll think of is the Rads and what have you. But hey ho, I'm living here, so I need to tell them. And I remember sort of saying, oh well, I moved into this house and it's just off Relton Road, expecting thing. And my mother went, oh, I used to walk down every day Relton Road. So she remembered it when it was smart.
Yeah.
Because it was middle class.
Good
So, yeah, extraordinary. It's just weird, this kind of how everything seems to be so extraordinarily interconnected in terms of that. So then sort of, you know, becoming part of LGSM, where do we go? South Wales, to this sort of mining community. And that was just amazing in itself. But I was in pantomime in Swansea during the first miners' strike. So there are all these, it's weird. Love it. Love it.
Do you ever look back over your life now as a 70-year-old man and kind of think that, do you ever imagine what your life would be, or who you would be had you not contracted it?
No, I don't. I never think about that. All I think about is that if I hadn't met Mr. Young, I'd be dead.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Without
Keeps you alive.
doubt. Yeah. I mean, sort of. Even though I'd said, you know, couldn't commit suicide, I don't think that I would have handled.
Right.
You know.
Support
the lack of
needed.
bills,
Yeah.
and I mean, I just fell into this most amazing support network.
When you talk about community, and obviously the sense of, so back then when people took to the streets, and I think you've mentioned in an interview recently about it's activism is now quite isolated. People just sit at home and click on a petition. They've lost that sense of let's all rally together and.
Yeah, I don't think that they've lost it, because it does.
It's just changed.
It happens, and it's much more difficult.
Yeah.
Or it seems more difficult to galvanise, but actually, you know, Extinction Rebellion. Wow. Yeah. They've got people sort of out on the street. So, you know, there's been lots. I mean, there's sort of, you know, this sort of, you know, anti-Brexit. They've sort of come out in their sort of millions. So it does happen. You know, it happens sort of against the Iraq War, that there, but it's not. It doesn't seem to be the same way that it was before. But then, you know, with all the draconian sort of anti-union legislations that sort of the Tory party sort of brought in, that Thatcher brought in. I think that sort of, you know, you didn't get the same kind of things. And then gay pride was always a demonstration. But suddenly it was almost as though once sort of, and you know, we had that amazing march in '85 with the miners. I mean, sort of, you know, that they arrived. I mean, it actually happened. It's not a figment of the film's imagination.
That happened.
They arrived. They brought with them the Red Band, and there probably were sort of, I don't know, sort of 1,000 plus, you know, people who'd come up from South Wales to join sort of gay pride. So much so that the organisers seriously said, you know, there are too many of you. You will have to lead the march, and you got a band. So, you know, we'd been told that you know, political groups go to the back because that's where we always were.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then after that it all seemed to change, and maybe some of that was to do with the fact of HIV and AIDS, and that kind of sort of just drained the community, and there was a lot sort of sadness, you know, in those early years. I mean, it was like it was like, I imagine it must have been in the First World War,
Right.
that there was just such a decimation of sort of young people, you know, young men particularly, but of young people, that it kind of takes the heart out of community. So yeah, but it's back. It is back.
And what do you think is the future?
I don't know.
Do you think we're doing enough?
No, I don't think we are doing that. I certainly don't think that you know, him with the gas fire going on. But I what really sort of, I am really sort of concerned for like my nieces, my nephews, my great niece and nephew, in terms of what we have left them. Because I think that sort of this planet is hurtling to kind of sort of basically destruction unless we really put the brakes on. And there's part of me that feels that there are just business interests that are so kind of caught up, and the likes of sort of, you know, Trump, just climate change deniers.
Yeah.
And suddenly it'll be too late. I mean, they're saying, you know, we've got 8 to 10 years to really sort of change our ways and you know, get rid of fossil fuels and you know, head towards sort of, you know, green energy. And I don't know whether it'll happen. One has to hope that it will, but you know, I don't know.
Do you think you'll reach 100?
Nah.
I think you might.
Listen, I am amazed that I hit 70. I mean, you know, I never thought I would hit 40, and then it was 50, and then it was 60, then it was 65. But that's fine. You know, I've hit 70, and I've been amazingly fortunate. You know, I live in this housing cooperative. Our rents are reasonable. We're kind of, it is a community, which sometimes makes one slightly lazy. You don't need to go out to create community because it's on your doorstep. But yeah, I mean, sort of, I don't know. It's fine. It's. I think that my generation, we have been really kind of fortunate. You know, we had free education, we had a national health service, and yeah, it's one has seen a lot. I can't really believe that I'm sort of as old as I am. I can kind of, you know, I'm as old as my parents were. But yeah, it's but there's, I mean, what's great is that there's lots to do, you know, so that around sort of, you know, HIV and dealing with stigma, I'm really kind of sort of passionate at, you know, adding my voice wherever I can to that. I'm really happy to talk about it because I just think that it's really important that it is spoken about, you know, so that sort of people get to understand, you know, that we're just human beings, but sort of, so there's lots of lots to be positive about.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
It's
been an honour.
Pleasure. Thank you. No. You know, it's It's great. It's great. Thank you.
We should insist as a basic right for every person living with HIV, no matter where they are in the world, that they should have access to treatment.
So the good news is your gonorrhea is easily treatable.
Can I have a test for HIV as well?
Sure.
I'm executive director of an organisation called NAM Publications, and one of the things which we do is provide information about HIV through our website AIDSmap.